Hey World Changers, it's Pastor Wes, and welcome back to day 3 of Change Starts Within. We're talking about this all week, and I've been kind of building up, and of course building up to the last day where you just kind of see it all come together is what it is, and we're going day by day and laying a foundation and giving practical tools. What we're talking about is changing your world on the inside first to see change in your outside world is what we want to do. And with that change, where it takes place is in your believing, in your soul ultimately, which is your thinking, your feeling, and your decision making. That's what we've been talking about, and it's done by the Word of God and the revelation about Jesus. Well, how does that really take place in work? You may say, Pastor Wes, and I'm glad you asked the question. So let's get into that today. I want to talk about really the guts of this thing. How do I actually see change? So let me read from Romans 12, verse 1 through 2. And it says, "And so, dear brothers and sisters," this was Paul talking here, "I plead with you to give your bodies or give your lives over to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him." Now here's the next part too that I really want to catch that gets the whole meat of this thing. It says, "Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, the ways of thinking, the ways of feeling, the decision making, but let God," see, God does the work here. "Let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good, pleasing, and perfect." Hey, when you allow God, that's what I want to emphasize more than anything. When you give your body over to God and say, "God, I want you to come transform me." How do I see that transformation? See the difference in conforming to the word, which means just kind of going with it. But God has the power to come in and transform, completely change. And how does he do it? It says right here, by changing the way you think. Let me give you some more practical examples. I've been trying to be very transparent this week. One of the things I talked about yesterday was the relationship with my son. One of the things that was so hard in my thinking was all the fear of what could happen to him. All the fear of how he'd grow up. The fear of, is he going to grow up one day and not love me as a father? Is our relationship not going to be able to hold together? And all those fears the enemy would play on. And then the insecurities would come up. Well, did I do a good enough job? Was I there enough? Am I being there enough? Am I good enough a father? Can I make things happen? Can I connect with my son? What does he really think? And it just goes on this whole whirlwind. And that whole narrative would control the decision making in my life over there. It would control the decision-making of father. And it actually, a lot of people look at the outside and say, wow, you did so many great things with your son. And I would do all these, what I would believe most fathers would be like, that's really good acts. But here's the thing, fear was behind all of it. I was overcompensating and trying to do so many good things for my son, but he was all driven by fear. And see, even good deeds and good acts can be masked by fear and paranoia, where I was like, let me make sure my son doesn't think anything bad of me, doesn't think any of these horrible things. So I would try to do everything I can, be as perfect as possible as a dad. And it was all based out of fear. And here's what would happen. When I'd mess up and make one mistake, it just brought so much shame, so much condemnation because I was trying to be a perfect father when even my son never asked me to do that. My son just asked me to love him, to be there unconditionally. And yeah, some days my son did turn around and be like, "I hate you, Dad." And it was a moment is what I realized, or a moment of confusion. I realized my son and I didn't always see eye to eye or get along, and I realized that's normal. The part that I want you to see, though, is I didn't let fear continue to grip me those ways. I didn't let fear continue to run the show when those moments happened. And what it allowed me to do was respond differently because I changed inside of here. And as I changed inside of here, responded differently, I got to see some biggest breakthroughs and change with the relationship with my son. But it took changing here first. It took dealing with the insecurities. It took dealing with the fears. Yeah, I had to stop being conformed to the pattern of the world's way of parenting, which even being a good parent can be fueled by fear is what that can be. I had to allow God to transform me to his will and what the word said about being that. And what did that do? That changed in that area of my life, my inside world. And I started seeing the fruit of God in my outside world. I started seeing the fruit of God in the outside world with my son as a father and us connecting there. Why? That change started here. And I had to bring it back home to say, Wes, you keep expecting a different response from your son. You keep expecting a different response in my co-parenting relationship with his mom. But what I didn't see all the time in the beginning was I needed to see a different response from me. I needed to respond to myself differently. I needed to allow God to take those insecurities out, rewire them, replace them with strength, replace them with confidence, replace them with the right identity so I could act different and I could be different. And ultimately what I've been seeing, which is what Romans 12 taught about the end, is this, his will is what that is. It says you'll see God's will, which is good, pleasing, and perfect. And because I changed my inside world, I could see God in my outside world. I could see his will in my outside world. I could see those things that were good, pleasing, and perfect. And ultimately what it would do, it would cause me to collaborate with God, to collaborate with this plan, to work together instead of working against God. I didn't even realize because of my fears, I was actually working against God, which is causing a ton of stress, a ton of anxiety, and a ton of pressure on my life is what it was doing that God never asked me to do. Why though? Because my thinking, I couldn't see God's will. I couldn't see God's plan. I couldn't see how God was trying to unfold. So let's bring that back around to us now. Let's bring that back around how that applies to you. It's sitting there like we talked about yesterday and allow the Word of God to transform your thinking is what it is. Take a step back and realize, am I conforming to the way of the world? And the truth is we all are in some way, and we all have to go through that process and make the switch over. But be willing to acknowledge that. Be willing to bring it all before God. Yes, bring your body, every part of it, every part of your life. Bring it before God. I had to bring the fear before God. I had to bring the ugly thinking before God. I had to bring my missteps and my misbehavior before God before it could ever be transformed by allowing me to think differently, to see differently, so I could view things differently, and ultimately come in agreement with his wonderful plan for my life, my family's life, my son's life. And that's what I know he'll do for you. Now, tomorrow I'm going to get into some really cool things, and it's going to tie right into where we just left off here. So remember where we left off about changing the inside things in your thinking, because we're going to deal with a little more tomorrow about some insecurity side of it and how God comes in and reshapes our view of ourselves out of, we're going to pick right back up here in Romans 12 and verse 3 is what we're going to do. So I encourage you to do that. I love you guys. I hope more than ever, as you hear this, God is able to come in there, rearrange some things, and you experience some beautiful, wonderful healing in your life that shows up in your outside world. See you tomorrow.